welcome to Ascended Masters 101. This is where we talk all about the teachings of the Ascended Masters. Have you ever met someone who is so accomplished that their resume would cover like 90 pages, and then you meet those career counselors in college who are like, let's see if we can fit that resume onto one page? Okay, that's how I feel as I'm trying to make a respectably short video about the Ascended Master Saint Germain. He's just so incredible that it's almost hard to know where to start. First off, let me say that an Ascended Master is someone who has triumphed over time and space and graduated from the schoolroom of earth to return to the heart of God forever. It's the ultimate goal of life and something that you and I are meant to do as well. If you want to learn more about the Ascended Masters, check out the video on this channel called Who Are the Ascended Masters?
So first, let's talk about who Saint Germain has been before he became an Ascended Master, while he was still walking the earth like you and I. Now, the Ascended Masters explain that reincarnation is indeed a thing, and that souls often come back to earth many times before they have learned all their spiritual lessons and are ready to graduate back to the heart of God. It does us a lot of good to study the lifetimes, or what are called embodiments of Ascended Masters, because we can learn valuable keys about how they passed their spiritual exams and had their ultimate victory so that we can apply those lessons in our lives. It also gives us a really good sense of who these Ascended Masters are. Saint Germain had a lot of illustrious embodiments, so let's jump in. The first recorded embodiment that we know of for the soul of Saint Germain was when he was a ruler of a Golden Age civilization over 50,000 years ago in a fertile country where the Sahara Desert now is. I'm not kidding, this stuff is true. He was a king emperor and a master of the ancient wisdom. People looked to him as a standard for their own emerging godhood. His empire reached an incredible height of beauty, symmetry, and perfection. But, as often happens with Golden Age civilizations, this one didn't last because the people became more interested in the pleasures of the senses than they were in God. So, Saint Germain was instructed by cosmic councils to withdraw from his empire so that the people's karma would be their teacher. The king held a great banquet, and each guest received a crystal goblet filled with an elixir that was pure electronic substance. This elixir was Saint Germain's gift of soul protection to them, so that when their opportunity would come again much later in the age of Aquarius, that's now actually, to bring back that Golden Age civilization, they would remember their I am presence. That's the part of each of us that is God. And they would become a sign to all people that God can and will dwell with his people when they make themselves a fitting habitation for his spirit. The king and his family withdrew 7 days after the banquet, and the kingdom was overtaken the next day, as had been predicted by a spiritual being who attended the banquet. Saint Germain was also high priest of the Violet Flame Temple on the mainland of the continent of Atlantis 13,000 years ago before it sank. Yes, the continent of Atlantis is also a thing. Truth is stranger than fiction. In that lifetime, Saint Germain sustained a fountain of violet singing flame through the power of the spoken word. It drew people from all over who came to be set free from all kinds of limiting conditions in their bodies and their minds and their souls. He became a priest in the order of Melchizedek in that lifetime, which combines perfect science and perfect religion. Before Atlantis sank, while Noah was still building his ark and warning others about the great flood that was coming, an Ascended Master named the Great Divine Director called Saint Germain and a few faithful priests to transport the flame of freedom that was in the Temple of Purification to a safe place in the Carpathian foothills of Transylvania. In those foothills, Saint Germain sustained this flame as the events of the sinking of Atlantis occurred. Can you imagine? In succeeding embodiments, Saint Germain and his followers rediscovered the flame under the guidance of the Great Divine Director and continued to guard the shrine. Later, the Great Divine Director, assisted by his disciple, established a retreat at the site of the flame and founded the House of Rákóczi, the royal house of Hungary. In the 11th century BC, Saint Germain came back as the prophet Samuel. Samuel was an incredible religious leader in a time of great trouble. In those days, judges were charismatic leaders who were believed to have direct access to God and to rally the tribes of Israel against oppressors, which he did. He was a messenger of God and is named alongside Moses as a great intercessor. He reminded his people to return to the Lord with all their hearts and to put away the strange gods. The people repented and begged Samuel not to stop calling upon the Lord to save them. Saint Germain was embodied as Saint Joseph, the husband of Mary and the father of Jesus. In the Bible, we read about how when the angel of the Lord warned Joseph in a dream that Herod planned to kill Jesus, Joseph listened and took his family to Egypt, returning only after Herod's death. We know from the Ascended Masters that you can pray to Saint Germain before you sleep at night and ask him to help you. He will warn you of steps that you need to take if there is danger in your own life. In the late 3rd century, Saint Germain was embodied as Saint Alban, the first martyr of Britain. Alban lived in England during the persecution of Christians under the Roman Emperor Diocletian. He was a pagan who had served in the Roman army and settled in the town of Verulamium, later renamed St. Albans. Alban hid a fugitive Christian priest named Amphibolus, who converted him. When soldiers came looking for him, Alban allowed the priest to escape and disguised himself in the priest's garb. Once they figured out what he had done, Alban was scourged and sentenced to death. Legend says that such a multitude gathered to witness his execution that they couldn't pass over a narrow bridge that had to be crossed. Alban prayed and the river parted to give passage to the crowd. At this point, his appointed executioner was converted and begged to die in his place. The request was denied and he was beheaded along with Alban. Can you imagine? Such a rough time to live in back then, but so much character. It makes you think if you'd be willing to be potentially beheaded for standing up for what you believe in. Saint Germain worked from the heaven world as the master teacher behind the Neoplatonists. He inspired the Greek philosopher Proclus, the highly honored head of Plato's Academy at Athens. Under Saint Germain's tutelage, Proclus based his philosophy upon the principle that there is only one true reality, the one, which is God, the final goal of all life's efforts. Proclus's writings extended to almost every department of learning. He acknowledged that his enlightenment and philosophy came from above, and he saw himself as an instrument of divine revelation. In the 5th century, Saint Germain was embodied as Merlin the alchemist, prophet and counselor at the court of King Arthur. Now, interestingly, Arthur was an embodiment of this famous and also deeply loved Ascended Master Almoria. Merlin led Arthur through 12 battles, which were actually 12 spiritual tests to unite the kingdom of Britain. He worked closely with the king to establish the sacred fellowship of the Round Table. Under Merlin and Arthur's guidance, Camelot was actually a spiritual school known as a mystery school, in which knights and ladies pursued the Holy Grail and their own spiritual advancement, walking in Jesus' footsteps to discover their own Christhood. The soul of Saint Germain came back in 1451 as Christopher Columbus, the discoverer of America. Interestingly, only 200 years before Columbus sailed, in another embodiment as the famous Roger Bacon, he made prophecies in his Opus Magus that were instrumental in Columbus's discovery and inspired his 1492 journey. So he was laying the foundation for his own soul's progress later on. Saint Germain's last embodiment was Francis Bacon, who has been called the greatest mind the West ever produced. He is known as the father of inductive reasoning and the scientific method, which to a great degree are responsible for the age of technology that we live in today. He foreknew that only applied science could free people from human misery and the drudgery of sheer survival so that they can seek a higher spirituality that they once knew. He has come to be recognized as the true author of the Shakespearean plays, and his book, The Great Instauration, launched the English Renaissance. Bacon also organized the translation of the King James Version of the Bible because he felt that the common people should have access to God's word themselves. He did all this and much more, but he went largely unrecognized because he was the son of Queen Elizabeth, who refused to recognize him because she was afraid of losing power too soon. You can read all about this in the book The Shakespeare Code. Toward the end of his life, Bacon was persecuted and went unrecognized for his manifold talents. So let's think about this. Francis literally wrote the Shakespeare plays, translated the Bible, launched the English Renaissance, became the father of inductive reasoning, and was heir to the throne as his right by birth, but was unrecognized because his own mother wanted power more than she wanted to acknowledge him. Talk about spiritual testing. But he must have passed this test because, as we read in Ascended Master Encyclopedia, quote, triumphing over circumstances that would have destroyed lesser men, his soul entered the ritual of the Ascension from the Rakowski Mansion retreat of the Great Divine Director on May 1st, 1684, end quote. So this is the same place where he had faithfully tended the flame of freedom those many embodiments ago. But that wasn't the end. Saint Germain was so devoted to freeing the souls on earth that he asked for and was given permission from councils in heaven to actually come back to earth in a physical body after his ascension to help some more. He is the only ascended master that I know of who actually got permission to do this. So he appeared in the earth as Le Comte de Saint Germain, a quote, miraculous gentleman who dazzled the courts of 18th and 19th century Europe. So he was there for a while. He was called the Wonder Man. He was an alchemist, scholar, linguist, poet, musician, artist, diplomat, and raconteur, which is a teller of stories. That makes sense, right? After his lifetime as Shakespeare. He was admired throughout the courts of Europe for his adeptship. You can see that he is the culmination, right, of all the talents that he has developed over his many lifetimes. He was known for being able to remove the flaws in diamonds and other precious stones, and for writing a letter with one hand and poetry with the other at the same time. Voltaire described him as, quote, the man who never dies and who knows everything, end quote. That just cracks me up. The Count is mentioned in the letters of numerous people and in the newspapers of that time. Working behind the scenes, Saint Germain, as the Wonder Man, tried to prevent the French Revolution and to unite Europe, but his counsel was ignored. He had already turned his attention to the New World, and he became the sponsoring master of the United States of America and of her first president, George Washington. He inspired the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. If you want to read more about Saint Germain's sponsorship of America, you can read the book Saint Germain on Alchemy, the chapter called The Mystical Origins of the United States of America. It starts on page 101. He also inspired many of the labor-saving devices of the 20th century to move his goal forward of liberating mankind, that's us, from drudgery so that they could devote themselves to finding God. And those are Saint Germain's embodiments that we know of. You can see this amazing common thread that runs through so many of his lifetimes, that of championing freedom and of showing the souls of earth, again, us, how to get back to God over and over again, lifetime after lifetime. I mean, that's huge. The self-help books of today are all trying to encourage people to have the self-discipline and focus to stick with one thing for like 30 days. And Saint Germain has been at this for literally thousands and thousands of years. Just think about that. If anyone has proven that they love us and are a true friend and brother along life's way, Saint Germain's done it. In fact, the name Saint Germain comes from the Latin Sanctus Germanus, which means holy brother. And he's still doing the same thing today. He's doing everything he possibly can to help you and I make our ascension and to bring a golden age to the planet. And if you thought he did a lot on earth, you should see what he's been up to on our behalf in heaven. In part 2 of this video, we'll talk all about that, who Saint Germain is now, and some of the unconventional approaches he's been taking in the heaven world to keep helping us on our spiritual paths back to God.
So, that in a nutshell, or maybe 2 nutshells, is a summary of the Ascended Master Saint Germain. He's such an incredible friend and guide on the spiritual path, and I'm so glad you got to meet him. If you want to get to know Saint Germain better, I recommend the pocketbook called Saint Germain. I also recommend the book called Lords of the Seven Rays for a more detailed, deep dive discussion of this awesome Ascended Master. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe, and God bless you.